It rests in the low light of an archive, a block of baked clay from Nippur. It is not a monument, it is a receipt, an administrative record from a world that has turned to dust. You can feel its weight in your mind, the heft of something made to endure. The surface is covered in a script of small, sharp wedges, pressed into the wet clay by a scribe's stylus 4,000 years ago. The marks are precise, uniform, and without flourish. They record the transfer of 17 measures of barley from the temple storehouse to a man whose name is now just a series of impressions. It is a document of profound and complete mundanity, one of tens of thousands just like it. The list is exact, the quantities are verified, the names of the functionaries are duly noted. The entire transaction is an exercise in the meticulous accounting that allowed the first cities to exist. Nothing is left to ambiguity. The scribe's world was one of order, of quantification, of records that must balance. Every line speaks of a system built to track the tangible, to manage a physical reality of harvests, herds, and labor. The tablet is a testament not to gods or kings, but to the quiet, foundational power of bureaucracy. Its purpose is to prevent disputes, to create a factual record immune to the erosion of memory. And then, at the very end of the document, after the final tally of grain, there is a concluding phrase. It is not an oath to a deity, nor a dedication to a king. It is a simple, declarative statement of authority, written in the same dispassionate hand as the rest of the text. It states that the transaction is valid, the record sealed under a higher ordinance. The source of this final authority is cited with the cool brevity of a legal precedent. It reads, "By the decree of the Anunnaki." The phrase is not explained. It is not elaborated upon. It is simply stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. A silence seems to emanate from the clay itself. The air in the archive is still, heavy with the dust of centuries. The single, unexplained phrase hangs there, a profound dissonance in an otherwise perfectly coherent record. It is a signature without a signatory, an authority without a face. The scribe felt no need to explain who or what this authority was. For him, for his entire civilization, it was an axiom, an unstated truth that formed the bedrock of their reality. And in his perfect administrative clarity, he has left us with a perfect and absolute mystery. This tablet is not unique. Another, unearthed from the ruins of Uruk, 200 kilometers to the south and dated 2 centuries later, details the allocation of land for a new temple. The language is different in its dialect, the names have changed, but the structure is the same. It is a document of civil engineering and resource management, filled with measurements, labor assignments, and material logistics. It is a blueprint for a physical structure in a material world. Yet it too concludes its dry, technical specifications with a similar, unadorned citation of a final authority, the ultimate source of the directive. The recurrence of the pattern is where the quiet unease begins. It suggests this is not a quirk of a single scribe or a local tradition. It is a systemic feature of their record-keeping. Some records seem to wait for a particular kind of attention, a patience that matches their own. To keep this kind of document close is to ensure one does not lose the trail. It is a recognition of a question that has slept in the clay for millennia, waiting for a new kind of silence in which to be heard again. These are not grand mythological narratives. They are not hymns of praise or epic poems telling of the deeds of gods. The citations appear in the most functional of contexts: legal rulings, astronomical calculations, lists of kings, and inventories of temple goods. They are embedded in the machinery of the state and the economy. The Anunnaki are referenced as a board of directors might be in a corporate memo, as the ultimate source of a policy that is being implemented by others. The name appears not as an object of worship, but as a point of origin for a command. Consider the scribe. His hand was steady, his knowledge of the script absolute. His profession was one of the highest callings in the Sumerian world, for it was the scribe who made civilization possible. He was trained for years to achieve a state of perfect, impersonal precision. His task was not to create, but to record, to render the complexities of the world into a fixed and unchangeable form. His obsession was with detail, with ensuring that every transaction, every law, every celestial observation was documented without error. He was the enemy of ambiguity. And yet, this same man, this guardian of clarity, leaves the single most important word in his entire legal framework completely undefined. He accounts for every measure of grain, but provides no account of the ultimate authority he cites. This is not an oversight. In a culture that documented everything of perceived importance, a silence of this magnitude cannot be accidental. It is a structured absence. It is a piece of information so foundational, so universally understood, that it required no explanation, like a modern scribe feeling no need to define what the government is. We are left, then, not with a story, but with the ghost of a system. We hold in our hands the operational outputs of a vast administrative machine, but the machine's blueprints are missing. We have thousands of receipts, but no charter. The tablet from Nippur, which began as a simple record of barley, has become something else entirely. It is now evidence of a profound and deliberate silence. The question it poses is no longer about the grain. It is about the nature of the authority that guaranteed its transfer, and the world of assumed knowledge that made explaining them unnecessary. We must begin with the document known as the Sumerian King List. It is not a story. It is a ledger of power, a succession of names and numbers compiled by scribes over centuries. Its purpose is administrative, to establish a continuous, unbroken line of royal authority from the dawn of time to the present day of the scribe. The tone is uniform, arid, and declarative. It presents itself as a factual record, a single coherent account of who held the scepter of kingship and for how long. The clay is cool, the script unwavering. There is no preamble, no mythological framing. It begins as a simple list. The first section of the list documents the reigns of 8 kings before a great flood. The numbers recorded are precise and unadorned. The first king, Alulim, ruled from the city of Eridu for 800 years. His successor, Alalangar, is recorded as reigning for 36,000 years. The list continues in this fashion, city by city, king by king, with reigns of 21,000 years, 43,200 years, 18,600 years. The scribe's stylus makes no distinction, offers no apology for the scale of the figures. He is merely logging the entries as they were preserved in the temple archives. The sum of these 8 reigns is given as 200 years. After the entry for the 8th king, the scribe inserts a single administrative note, a structural marker in the flow of data. The line is not emotional or descriptive. It is a logistical observation, a record of a fundamental discontinuity in the operational environment. It reads simply, "Then the flood swept over." The event is recorded with the same dispassionate finality as the closing of a fiscal year. It is a line in a ledger, marking the end of one column of figures before the next begins. The catastrophe is noted, and the record continues. Following the entry for the flood, the list resumes. It states, "After the flood had swept over, and the kingship had descended from heaven." The kingship was in Kish. The names that follow are now different. The reigns are shorter, more recognizable. The 23rd king of the first dynasty of Kish, Enmebarajesi, is recorded with a reign of 900 years, a number still vast, but of a different order of magnitude entirely. Later kings are listed with reigns of 30, 15, or 8 years. The scribe uses the exact same formula, the same grammatical structure, for both the pre-Diluvian and post-Diluvian rulers. The impossible and the historical are entered into the same spreadsheet, under the same column headings. This is not the only such list. Other administrative texts detail not the holders of power, but the components of civilization itself. They speak of a set of cosmic decrees or divine prototypes known as the me. The term is technical. The me are not abstract concepts, but are described as a finite, innumerable collection of powers and duties that enable a complex society to function. They are the blueprints of order, the operating system of the world. They are listed in texts with the precision of an inventory. Over 100 are named, though the full list is believed to have been longer. The inventory of the me includes items fundamental to the Sumerian state. Among them are the high priesthood, the throne of kingship, the exalted scepter, and the staff and the crook. These are the tools of governance, listed as if they were physical objects stored in a divine warehouse. The texts do not speak of their invention by humans. Instead, they are recorded as having been handed down, assigned to humanity and its designated cities by a higher authority. The origin of social order is presented as an act of delegation, not of evolution. The list extends beyond governance into every facet of organized life. It includes the scribal art, the craft of the smith, the skill of the leatherworker, and the building of temples. Even social behaviors are catalogued as me, the kindling of strife, the giving of judgments, the making of decisions. Each element that constitutes their world, from the tangible to the intangible, is treated as a discrete, transferable unit of a cosmic system. The scribe's task is to catalog these units, to ensure the inventory is correct. He is an auditor of existence. The source of this cosmic distribution is explicitly named. The tablets state that the Anunnaki Council, led by the great gods Anu and Enlil, held the complete collection of these decrees. It was from this council that the me were assigned to specific deities and, through them, to specific cities. The god Enki, for example, is often depicted as the administrator of this distribution, the guardian of the divine decrees who bestows them upon the world. The process is always top-down, a transfer of assets from a higher-order entity to a lower one. In one text, the goddess Inanna travels to the city of Eridu, the seat of Enki, to acquire these decrees for her own city of Uruk. The transfer is described almost as a legal transaction, a complex negotiation for foundational technologies. She obtains the me for kingship, for the priesthood, for law, and for a dozen other functions, and transports them to Uruk. The story is not one of creation, but of acquisition and implementation. Uruk does not invent civilization. It receives the operating codes from the central server. It is perhaps a good moment to register the physical reality of this present space. The light in the room, the specific hour on the clock. These are fixed points. The documents from 4 millennia ago are also fixed points. We are simply drawing a line between them, a line made of quiet attention. The silence that holds these facts is the same silence that held them in the clay for ages. The authority that assigns these decrees is not a vague or singular force. The records describe a formal body, an assembly. The texts refer to the Anunnaki as those who decree the fates, and they are consistently portrayed as a collective that meets to deliberate. The most important decisions concerning the heavens and the earth are not made by a single monarch, but by a vote in this high council. This is not the narrative structure of myth. It is the procedural structure of a governing body. Their function is specified. In the assembly they gather to pass judgment and make foundational rulings. The Sumerian term for this assembly is the ukin. The tablets describe a formal process where issues are brought before the council, debated, and a final, binding decision is reached. The fate of cities, the appointment of kings, and the very course of history are subject to the outcome of these deliberations. The scribes record the results of these assemblies as legal precedent. A number is sometimes attached to the core of this body. They are referred to as the 50 Great Gods, Hadatai, the senior members of the assembly who hold the power to cast the final vote. This numerical specificity is unusual for mythological accounts, but common in administrative records that need to define a quorum or a board of directors. The number is not symbolic. It appears to be a functional designation for the highest tier of this cosmic legislature. This assembly is even given a specific location in the terrestrial world, a place where the divine and earthly administrative planes were believed to intersect. The texts name the great courtyard of the temple of Enlil in Nippur, the Ekur, as the site of this council. Its special name was the Ubshu Ukina. This was the chamber where the fates of the land were decided. The scribes were not recording events in a distant, abstract heaven, but decisions emanating from a named and recognized center of power. The procedure of their deliberations is also noted. The god Anu, as patriarch, held the authority to call the assembly. Enlil, his acting executive, would typically propose the motion or the decree to be considered. The other senior Anunnaki would then offer their consent, and the decision would be ratified. This sequence, proposal, deliberation, and ratification, is a recurring formula in the texts that describe major cosmic or earthly events. It is the language of a parliament, not a pantheon. This administrative precision extends to the sky itself. The great astronomical compendiums, such as the series Mul, Apin, are not collections of stories about the stars. They are observational databases, charting the movements of celestial bodies for the purpose of calendar making and divination. They are manuals of cosmic mechanics. The sky is divided into 3 great ways or paths, each assigned to one of the 3 chief gods of the council: the way of Anu, the way of Enlil, and the way of Ea, Enki. Within these designated celestial jurisdictions, specific constellations and planets are identified, and their behavior is meticulously recorded. The planet Jupiter, for example, is noted as the celestial body that represents the god Marduk, and its position is used to determine favorable signs. The Pleiades star cluster is identified as the Mul-Mul, the star of stars. The sky is not a canvas for myth. It is a zoned and regulated territory, a celestial map of divine administrative responsibilities. We end this act with a final, colder record, a kuduru, a boundary stone from the Kassite period, a successor culture deeply indebted to Sumerian systems. These stones are legal documents, carved to publicly record land grants made by the king. They detail the field's dimensions, the parties involved, and the conditions of the grant. And to protect the record from being altered, they conclude with a long list of curses, invoking divine powers to punish any who would move the stone or change its inscription. The final invocation of authority, the ultimate guarantor of this property line, is reserved for the great Anunnaki, all of them. Why? Their authority is the final seal on a real estate transaction. The work does not begin in the field, under a harsh sun, but here, in the controlled quiet of a repository. On a wide, dark table, facsimiles of the records are laid out, their surfaces illuminated by a low, angled light. The act of seeing is an act of comparison. The Sumerian king list is placed to the left. The inventories of the Mi are placed to the right. The physical separation between them, once measured in centuries and kilometers of buried earth, is now reduced to a few inches of polished wood. The eye moves from one to the other, back and forth, searching not for a story, but for a structure. At first, the connection is one of form. Both are lists. One is a catalog of rulers, the other a catalog of the abstract technologies that make rule possible. The king list enumerates the men who held the scepter. The Mi inventories list the scepter itself, alongside the throne, the crown, and the law. They are parallel documents, 2 columns in the same unseen ledger. One tracks the personnel, the other tracks the assets. The cold, Administrative tone that permeates both is not a coincidence. It is the shared language of an immense bureaucratic project. The pattern deepens when we look at the origin each document assigns to its contents. Kingship, the list tells us, descended from heaven. It is not depicted as a human invention that evolved from tribal leadership. It is recorded as a complete system, delivered from an external source. Similarly, the me are not the products of societal development. They are described as a finite set of decrees, held by the gods and bestowed upon humanity. In both cases, the foundational elements of their world are framed as a top-down transfer, a delegation of power and function. This shared logic of reception, not invention, forms the first true resonance between the records. It suggests a civilization that understood its own existence as an implementation of a pre-existing design. They were not the architects of their world order, but its designated administrators. This perspective is embedded so deeply in their record-keeping that it appears as a simple statement of fact, an operational premise that required no justification. The system was not built, it was installed. A long moment passes. The silence in the room seems to merge with the silence of the scribes themselves. In this quiet, the space between the documents becomes active. It is no longer an empty gap, but a field of unseen connections. The mind resists the urge to fill it with speculation and instead simply holds the weight of the pattern. Two distinct categories of record, from different archives, articulating the exact same model of cosmic and civilizational origins. Into this established pattern, a third set of documents is introduced. The scattered references to the Anunnaki assembly, the council that meets to decree the fates. These are not lists but procedural notes, fragments describing a governing body. The question now shifts from what was delegated to who was the delegator. The researcher's hand moves a new file onto the table, containing translations of the assembly records. The organizational chart is missing its highest tier, and the search for it begins here. The connection is immediate and textual. The inventories of the me explicitly name the Anunnaki Council, led by Anu and Enlil, as the original holders of the complete collection. The council is not just a pantheon of powerful beings, it is the repository from which the operating system of civilization is distributed. Their function is not mythological, but logistical. They are the source of the assets being tracked in the second column of the ledger. The relationship is one of ownership and allocation. To remain with this kind of record is to watch a system emerge from the dust. It requires a certain patience, a willingness to let the connections form on their own terms, in their own time. Not everyone is meant to sit this long in the quiet of the archive. For those who stay, the reward is not an answer, but a clearer view of the question. The link to the king list is just as strong, though more structural. The first and most important of the me is the decree of kingship. The authority to rule, which the king list tracks, is itself an asset controlled and distributed by the council. When the list states that kingship descended from heaven after the flood, it is recording a reissuance of this primary decree from its ultimate source. The Anunnaki Council doesn't just appoint the king, it owns the very concept of the throne. The pattern is no longer a simple parallel. It is a hierarchy. At the apex sits the Anunnaki Assembly, the deliberative body that holds all foundational authority. Below them are the me, the discrete units of power and knowledge that constitute civilization. And at the base are the kings, the human regents appointed to implement these decrees on Earth. What we are seeing is not a collection of unrelated myths, but the preserved fragments of a single, coherent, and deeply bureaucratic system of cosmic governance. We can now see the scribe in a different light. He is not a poet or a priest weaving tales. He is a clerk. His work is to ensure the records of the different levels of this great administration are consistent. He logs the decrees of the High Council. He inventories the distributed assets, and he maintains the succession list of the earthly managers. The dispassionate tone of his writing is the natural voice of a man whose entire reality is structured like a well-run, ancient and silent corporation. A new tension arises from the numbers. The archaeologist's gaze settles on the reign lengths in the pre-Diluvian section of the king list. 28, 800 years for Alulim. 36, 0 Aruro for Alalangar. Then it shifts to another record, one that specifies the number of the senior voting members of the Anunnaki Council, the 50 great gods. In a system so obsessed with order and function, these precise, yet seemingly impossible figures cannot be arbitrary. They feel less like mythic hyperbole and more like technical data for which we have lost the context. The central contradiction is the scribe's consistency. The same cuneiform numerals, the same grammatical formulas are used to record a reign of 43, 200 years, as are used for a reign of 25 years. There is no stylistic shift, no change in tone to indicate a transition from fact to metaphor. He applies the rigorous, unambiguous language of accounting to both the plausible and the fantastic. This suggests that, within his framework, the distinction did not exist. Both were data points to be logged with equal precision. This numerical consistency implies that the figures are not symbolic exaggerations, but values recorded from a system of measurement that is alien to us. The scribe was not inventing. He was transcribing. He was working from older records, preserving data whose operational meaning was perhaps already fading, but whose numerical integrity had to be maintained. The numbers are the ghost of a forgotten mathematics, a calculus of time and power whose axioms are lost. The pattern then expands from the textual to the geographical. A map of ancient Mesopotamia is unrolled. The researcher's finger traces the course of the Tigris and Euphrates, settling on a single point. The city of Nippur. The texts are specific. The Anunnaki Council's earthly headquarters, the place where the fates of the land were decided, was the Ubshu Ukina, the great courtyard of the Ekur temple in Nippur. This is not an abstract heaven or a mythical mountain. It is a precise set of coordinates in the material world. Nippur was never the seat of a major political dynasty, yet it was the undisputed religious capital of Sumer for millennia. It was the city of Enlil, the chief executive of the Anunnaki Council. By locating the assembly here, the texts ground the entire cosmic administrative system in a physical terrestrial center. The decrees that shaped civilization were not ethereal pronouncements from the sky. They were understood to have been issued from a specific chamber, in a specific temple, in a specific city. The final piece is laid on the table. It is the Kuduru stone, the boundary marker, a document concerned with the most terrestrial of matters, the ownership of a plot of land. After detailing the field's measurements and the king's grant, the inscription invokes a long list of divine guarantors to protect its integrity. The final, and most powerful, seal on this humble real estate deal is the invocation of the great Anunnaki. Their authority extends from the macrocosm of celestial mechanics down to the microcosm of a single farmer's field. The table is now full. The individual records, once isolated artifacts, have resolved into a single, interlocking image. A system, a top-down structure of authority that is cited with the same administrative coolness in a list of cosmic decrees, a succession of kings, and a legal deed for property. The pattern is too consistent, too widespread, and too procedurally coherent to be dismissed as disconnected folklore. What we are facing is the faint, bureaucratic echo of a lost order of reality. The records do not begin with a creation story. They begin with a name that is also a function. The texts speak of Anu. They do not describe him. They assign him a sphere of influence and a title, the one who holds the Anuship, the ultimate sovereignty. This is not a name in the way a man has a name. It is a designation of an office, the highest seat in the assembly. The scribes refer to this authority as the final point of appeal, the origin from which all other legitimacy descends. His presence in the documents is that of a remote, foundational principle, a celestial authority whose existence is the primary axiom upon which the entire system is built. To conceive of a being as an office is to drain the mythic from the world. The concept of anuship suggests that the power resides not in the individual, but in the position. It implies a structure that predates its occupant, a framework of governance that is constant, even if the one who holds the title might change. This is the language of institutions, not of gods. The scribes were not recording the biography of a divine personage. They were referencing the highest authority within a durable, and perhaps ancient, legal and administrative framework. The name is a citation, not an act of worship. Beneath this final authority, the records place another, a figure named Enlil. His title is consistently given as Lord of the Command, Chakur, and his function is that of the chief executive. Where Anu's authority is ultimate and often distant, Enlil's is immediate and operational. It is he who convenes the assembly on earth, who proposes the decrees, and who oversees their implementation. In the allocation of the me, he is the primary distributor. In the appointment of kings, he is the one who grants the scepter. The texts portray him as the acting governor of the terrestrial domain, the enforcer of the council's decisions. The relationship is one of a defined hierarchy of command. It is not the chaotic emotional dynamic of a mythic family, but the clear procedural relationship between a sovereign authority and his designated executor. Anu decrees from the celestial way. Enlil translates that decree into action on the ground. The scribes record this division of labor with perfect consistency. Their world was not governed by the whims of capricious gods, but by a clear chain of command, where every major directive could be traced back through a specific office to its ultimate source. A breath of cold air seems to drift from the tablets themselves. It is the chill of pure structure, of a system so orderly that it leaves no room for the warmth of narrative. The light on the facsimiles reveals only the sharp, clean lines of the cuneiform, a script built for ledgers and laws. The silence in this space is no longer empty. It is filled with the resonance of this immense, unseen bureaucracy, a machine that ran for millennia before its operators fell silent. The third key functionary named in the records is Enki, later known as Ea. His domain is distinct from the others. The texts assign him the role of chief engineer and administrator of knowledge. He is the guardian of the divine decrees, the me. But his role is not merely custodial. He is the master of foundations, the one who understands the technical specifications of the world. He is invoked in the building of temples, the digging of canals, and the ordering of the cosmos. He is the system's architect, the one who knows how the machinery of civilization works. This functional specificity suggests that the creation and maintenance of their world was understood as a series of technical problems to be solved. Civilization was not a happy accident or an organic growth. It was an engineering project. Enki's role was to oversee this project, to ensure the correct protocols were implemented and the foundational blueprints were followed. When the goddess Inanna acquires the me for her city, she travels to Enki's domain to receive them. The transfer is a handover of operating systems, a managed deployment of cosmic technology. Other names appear, each with a portfolio of responsibilities. There is Ninhursag, whose function is consistently tied to the shaping of life, a role that feels less like a mother goddess and more like a specialist in biological forms. There is Nana, the god of the moon, whose primary role is calendrical and astronomical, the manager of celestial timekeeping, ensuring the cosmic clock runs correctly. Utu, the sun god, is also the chief justice, the overseer of law and order. Each name corresponds to a specific department in the cosmic administration. The pantheon, when viewed through these administrative records, dissolves. In its place, an organizational chart emerges. The world is managed by a series of departments, each with a designated director whose responsibilities are clearly delineated and rarely overlap. The great stories of their interactions are not epic struggles between good and evil, but records of interdepartmental jurisdiction, resource allocation, and the ratification of policy. The system they describe is rational, specialized, and profoundly bureaucratic. One simply sits with this for a moment. The mind, conditioned to see myth and metaphor in these ancient names, struggles to accept the cold, procedural reality presented by the scribes themselves. The strangeness is not in the fantastic nature of the beings, but in their complete lack of it. They are defined by their jobs, their actions documented with the dispassionate precision of a clerk recording the minutes of a committee meeting. The central function of the collective body, the Anunnaki assembly, is stated repeatedly and without ambiguity. They are those who decree the fates. This phrase, which sounds so poetic to the modern ear, appears in the texts with the weight of a legal or constitutional function. It is their primary responsibility. They meet in their chamber, the Abshu Ukina, to deliberate on the course of events and to issue binding decrees that will shape the future of both gods and humanity. This reframes the entire concept of destiny. In the Sumerian administrative worldview, fate is not a mysterious, unknowable force. It is a policy decision. It is the outcome of a formal, deliberative process conducted by a legitimate governing body. The future is not something that happens. It is something that is decided upon, ratified by a vote, and then recorded in the official archives. History, then, is the implementation of this strategic plan. The records ground this process in physical reality. The assembly of the 50 great gods does not convene in some ethereal, otherworldly realm. The texts are specific. They meet in the great courtyard of the Ekher Temple in Nippur. This was a known location, the religious and administrative heart of Sumer. The decrees that governed their world were understood to emanate from a specific, terrestrial address. Authority was not abstract. It had a physical headquarters. They are, in the end, defined only by their work. The texts are filled with the outputs of their administration. They are recorded as measuring the earth and dividing it into territories. They are credited with drawing up the designs for the first cities. They are cited as the authority that instituted kingship and gave humanity the arts of civilization. Every action attributed to them is an act of founding, ordering, measuring, or governing. We have a complete record of their professional activities, and yet we have nothing else. No text describes their origins. No document explains their ultimate nature. No scribe ever felt it necessary to write a single tablet detailing who or what they were, where they came from, or why they held this absolute authority. We are left with the complete operational history of an entity whose identity is a perfect blank. It is as if we had discovered the entire legal code and administrative archive of a great empire, but lacked a single document identifying its ruling class. The silence that surrounds them is therefore not one of ignorance, but of assumed knowledge. The scribe did not explain the Anunnaki. For the same reason, a modern clerk does not define the board of directors or the Supreme Court in an internal memo. They were not a story to be told. They were the source of the regulations he was tasked with recording. Their name was not an object of faith, but the final unassailable legal stamp on reality itself. The system, as we have seen it, is built upon layers of text. But the texts themselves were pulled from layers of earth. We must turn our attention from the archive table to the source itself. The great mounds of southern Iraq, the tells where cities lie one atop the other, a vertical library of time. Each stratum is a chapter, a century of life compressed into a few inches of soil, packed with the debris of existence, pottery shards, hearths, the foundations of homes. The archaeologist's trowel reads this library, descending through the pages, expecting a story of continuous settlement, of growth, decay, and rebuilding. The expectation is one of narrative continuity. A layer of ash might speak of a fire. A thick deposit of river silt might record a flood. A stratum filled with foreign weapons might tell of a conquest. These are the violent but legible paragraphs of history. The excavator learns to read the language of destruction and recovery. The city burns and is rebuilt. The river rises and the people return. The line of occupation, of human presence, should be unbroken, even if scarred. The story should continue, page after page, layer after layer, down into the deep past. And then the trowel finds a line that tells no story at all. Between a dense layer of late Uruk pottery and an early Jemdet Nasser settlement, there is a band of clean, sterile earth. It is not ash nor flood deposit. It is simply soil, devoid of the usual human detritus. It is a gap, a physical silence in the geological record of the city. For a period corresponding to several generations, it seems, people simply stopped living here. The site was not destroyed, it was vacated. The earth was left to the wind, accumulating a clean, empty layer before life inexplicably returned. This is not a record of a catastrophe. A catastrophe leaves evidence. This is a record of a cessation, a pause button pressed on the life of a city. The silence in this stratum of earth is absolute. It offers no explanation for its own existence. The layers above and below it are rich with the story of a complex society, but this thin band of clay is a page that has been left perfectly, intentionally blank. The mystery is not what happened, but why nothing happened in a place that had been a center of activity for 1,000 years. The air across the ruin is still. The sun bakes the empty soil. One can stand on the edge of the excavation trench and see this line with perfect clarity. A pale stripe running horizontally through the dark, compacted earth of millennia. It is a measured, physical representation of unrecorded and perhaps unlived time. The silence is not an absence of noise. It is an artifact in its own right, one that can be touched and measured. It has weight. It has duration. One can run a hand along the edge of this empty soil. It is a physical unit of forgetting, a measured interval of absence. It asks for a moment of attention equal to its own stillness. Let us hold the measure of that interval for a moment and feel the weight of time that is not accounted for. This physical gap in the earth is mirrored with unnerving precision in the documentary record. We can trace the scribal traditions of a given city, noting the evolution of their script, the continuity of their administrative formulas, the lists of their local officials. We expect a continuous stream of records, however mundane. But in certain periods, the stream simply dries up. The flow of clay tablets, which had run for centuries, stops. Not with a final dramatic account of disaster, but with the last receipt for a shipment of wool. Consider the city of Shurupak, the home of the famous instructions, a center of scribal learning. For centuries, its archives are dense and consistent. And then, around 2500 BCE, they cease. The last tablets are filed, and the clay falls silent. For the next 2 centuries, the archaeological record yields no new texts from this once literate hub. The specific style of the Shurupak scribal hand, a unique and identifiable tradition, vanishes from history as if it never existed. When the records in that region resume, they are different. The Sumerian dialect has shifted. The names of the officials have changed. The old administrative methods have been replaced. It is as though the city's operating system was shut down, and after a long, dark interval, rebooted with new software. The documentary continuity, the institutional memory carried by the scribes, has been irrevocably broken. There is no tablet that explains the shutdown. There is no record of the restart. Here, the invisible antagonist takes on a clearer form. It is the force of interruption itself. It is the unseen hand that can not only halt the stylus of the scribe, but can sterilize the very earth beneath a city's walls. It is an agent of pure cessation, leaving behind not ruins, but a clean, inexplicable void. This is not the chaos of war, which leaves rubble and stories of heroism. This is the cold, orderly silence of a project that has been formally decommissioned. We see it again in the Great King list. Our attention is drawn to the impossibly long reigns or the sequence of rulers. But the true anomaly may lie in the transitions. The kingship is in Kish. Then the entry closes. The next line opens. The kingship is in Uruk. There is no record of a war of succession, no treaty of vassalage, no marriage alliance. The transfer of supreme authority from one capital to another is noted with the dispassionate brevity of a change of address. The space between the last king of one dynasty and the first king of the next is a documentary void. The scribe does not attempt to explain the transition. He simply records the discontinuity as a settled fact. His silence suggests he is working from a record that has itself been severed. He is not omitting a story he knows. He is acknowledging a gap in the archives, a period for which no official account was preserved or perhaps ever written. In these precise moments of systemic rupture, the empty layer of soil, the silent centuries in the archive, the unexplained transfer of the throne, the name of the Anunnaki is nowhere to be found. The authority that is cited as the guarantor of the entire system is conspicuously absent when the system itself fractures or pauses. Their name, which seals the mundane transactions of a stable world, is not invoked to explain its profound interruptions. This silence is of a different order. It is a silence of function, not just of record. This is not a single missing link in a long chain of evidence. It is a recurring structural feature of the entire historical framework. The record we possess is not a continuous narrative, but a series of brilliantly illuminated episodes separated by deep, silent chasms of unknown duration and cause. The entire history of this civilization appears to be built upon a series of unexplained starts and stops, of clean breaks where the messy, chaotic processes of human history should be. The feeling is no longer of piecing together a puzzle with missing pieces. It is of examining a heavily redacted document. We are not looking at a partial or damaged story. We are looking at a story that may have been deliberately edited by a power that had the authority to remove entire chapters, leaving behind only the clean, sharp edges of the excision. The blacked-out sections are not empty. They are an active part of the composition. We see this most clearly with the end of Sumer itself. The rise of the Akkadian Empire under Sargon is documented, but almost entirely from the Akkadian perspective. The Sumerian language is relegated from the language of state to a liturgical tongue. The old temples are either abandoned or rebuilt under new patronage. The Sumerian view of this transition, the voice of the civilization that invented writing, simply ends. It is not a gradual decline. It is a wall of silence. This is not the silence of a pre-literate people who had no means to record their history. This is the silence of the most compulsively literate society in the ancient world. Their silence is not an oversight. It feels like a consequence. It is the sound of a system being switched off. The machinery of the scribal schools, the administrative centers, the temple archives, the entire apparatus of institutional memory stops all at once. We are left holding the edges of these broken tablets, these severed records. The true object of our investigation is not the cuneiform that covers their surface, but the clean, sharp breaks where the writing stops for no reason. The silence that flows from these gaps is not empty space. It is a presence. It is the final and perhaps most unsettling artifact in the entire collection. It is the ghost in the machine. The evidence is no longer a collection of fragments on a dark table. It has become a single, interconnected mechanism. The king list with its impossible numbers, the inventories of the Mio, the procedural notes from the divine assembly, the unexplained gaps in the earth. They are all gears in the same vast and silent machine. To see them together is to see, for the first time, not a history of a people, but the schematic of a system whose purpose, scale, and origin lie entirely outside the documents that describe its function. The quiet of the archive is the hum of this machine, waiting for its logic to be recognized. The numbers in the king list, the reigns of 28, 800 or 36 or years, cease to be the problem. They become a clue to the solution. They suggest that the history being recorded by the scribe was operating on a timeline, and by a calculus that is not human. The scribe was not exaggerating. He was dutifully transcribing data from a foreign system of measurement into his own. He was preserving the outputs of a clock whose workings he did not need to understand. The numbers are not myth. They are the artifacts of a different order of duration, the ghost of a time scale against which human history is a fleeting measurement error. This reframes the delegation of the me. It is no longer a story of gods gifting civilization to humanity. It becomes a record of a technology transfer. Kingship, law, the scribal art. These were not social evolutions. They were standardized modules, pieces of an operational package deployed from a central source to a local site. The story of Inanna acquiring the decrees for Uruk is not myth. It is a field report on the installation of a new software suite. Civilization was not invented here. It was implemented. The Sumerians were not its authors. They were its first users. The Anunnaki assembly, the council that meets to decree the fates, is therefore not a pantheon. It is the remote governing body, the board of directors for this entire terrestrial project. Their deliberations in the Ubshu Ukina were not divine dramas, but policy meetings whose minutes determined the operational parameters for the region. Their concerns, as recorded, were never with human morality or salvation, but with order, function, and the correct allocation of resources. They were managers, and the world was their asset. A different kind of weight now settles in the room. It is the weight of a fundamental misinterpretation that has lasted for millennia. We have been reading these texts as the childhood stories of humanity, filled with the poetry of myth and the grandeur of the gods. But the scribes themselves may have been writing something else entirely. The dry, procedural history of a local branch office in a cosmic scale enterprise. The scale of the operation is what feels so alien, not its fantastic elements. And if this was a project, then the gaps and silences in the record cease to be accidents of preservation. They become planned events. The sterile layer of soil in the earth is not a sign of abandonment. It is the mark of a site being deliberately cleared, wiped clean for the next phase of development. The cessation of a city's archives is not the symptom of a culture's collapse. It is the record of a program being formally terminated, its data logs sealed and its memory erased before a new system is brought online. The clean, unexplained transfers of kingship from one city to another are no longer a historical puzzle. They are the logical outcome of this remote management. The authority to rule, the me of kingship, was an asset to be assigned. When the council in Nippur decreed that the contract for local governance was to be moved from Kish to Uruk, the scribes simply recorded the change in designation. There was no need to document a human war for succession, because the decision was not made at a human level. The human figures in this history, the great kings, the high priests, the diligent scribes, begin to feel smaller, their agency diminished. They were not the architects of their destiny, but the local staff, the on-site functionaries tasked with implementing a plan whose full scope was never shared with them. They were meticulous in their work, proud of their roles, but they were not in charge. Their entire civilization was a subsidiary, granted an operational charter from an unseen and perhaps incomprehensible parent entity. The air is thin at this altitude of implication. The familiar landscape of ancient history dissolves, replaced by the stark outlines of a reality far more structured and far less human than we have ever imagined. To continue with these records is to accept that the story we thought we were uncovering is not the real story at all. This archive is a door to a much larger and quieter room. What, then, was the purpose of this immense, long-term project. The texts provide no answer. They are operating manuals, not mission statements. They detail the how with obsessive precision, but they are entirely silent on the why. The Anunnaki build cities, they institute laws, they measure the heavens, they manage humanity for thousands of years, and not once do they provide a reason for their actions in the records they left behind. Their motive is a perfect and absolute blank. This changes the nature of the question. We have been asking, who were the Anunnaki, assuming them to be beings we could define? But the records suggest a different question is more appropriate. What was the function of the Sumerian system? The evidence points not to a group of powerful gods interacting with humanity, but to a vast, impersonal system being installed on humanity. We were not the partners in this endeavor. We may have been the substrate. The world itself feels reordered. The great ziggurats are no longer just temples reaching for the gods. They become something else. Monitoring stations, administrative centers, perhaps even landing platforms, nodes in a network that connected the terrestrial operation to its remote command structure. The sacred precincts were not places of worship, but restricted zones, the headquarters from which the local implementation of the project was managed. The silence that surrounds the Anunnaki is no longer the silence of a missing story. It is the silence of a superior. It is the professional distance maintained by a management that does not share its strategic objectives with its workforce. The scribes did not explain who the Anunnaki were because it was not their place to do so. Their function was to record the directives, not to question their source. The silence is a feature of the hierarchy. This implication does not resolve the mystery. It deepens it to a scale that is almost impossible to hold. It suggests that the very origins of human civilization, the moment we stepped out of the Neolithic and into history, was not our own step. It was the result of a decision made elsewhere, for reasons we were never given. Our entire history is built upon a foundation that we cannot see, a silent alien-made platform. The final and perhaps most unsettling thought is this. If this system was installed, and if it was periodically shut down and rebooted, what is its current status? The records fall silent 2 millennia before the Common Era. The administrative chatter from the cosmic headquarters simply ceases. But the end of a project's documentation is not the same as the end of the project itself. It could simply mean the system entered a new phase, one that no longer required a literate local bureaucracy to manage it. We are left in a quiet that is now immense and active. The single clay tablet from Nippur is no longer just a record of a barley transaction guaranteed by a strange authority. It is a loose wire from a machine of planetary scale, and we have no idea if that machine is still running. The wind moves across the baked plains of southern Iraq, carrying the dust of cities whose names are now only scholarly footnotes. It is night. Above the low, eroded mound of Nippur, the stars are the same points of light the scribes once catalogued. They are cold, distant, and arranged in a pattern of perfect mathematical indifference. The wind makes no sound as it passes over the buried foundations of the Ekur, the temple where the fates of the land were once decided. There is no echo of the assembly, no whisper of the decrees. There is only the wind, the dust, and the immense, patient silence of the earth. This hill is not made of simple dirt and stone. It is a compacted archive of days, a vertical library of collapsed walls, discarded pottery, and the settled dust of 4,000 forgotten years. Every particle underfoot was once part of a human endeavor. A brick in a wall, a vessel for grain, a floor that was swept clean. To stand here is to stand atop a mountain of concluded work, of finished conversations. The ground itself is a testament to a system that ran for millennia, and then, for reasons unrecorded, simply stopped. The silence here is not an absence of sound. It is the physical presence of ended time. And in a quiet room, thousands of miles and a world away from that desert, the tablet from Nippur rests in low, controlled light. It is small enough to be held in two hands. Its weight is the weight of baked clay, but its presence is heavier. It has outlasted its scribe, his city, his language, his entire world. It has survived the rise and fall of empires that could not have imagined its existence. It is no longer a receipt for 17 measures of barley. It has become a vessel for a silence far older and more structured than the one that now blankets the ruins of its origin. The hand that pressed these marks into the wet clay is gone. The mind that held the intricate rules of the script has vanished. But the intent of that hand, the precise, dispassionate act of recording, remains perfectly preserved. He was not a poet, struggling to express the ineffable. He was a functionary, executing a task with the clarity and precision his office demanded. The great silence he left behind was not a failure of his craft. It was the highest expression of it. He recorded exactly what the system required, and nothing more. The blank space around the name of his ultimate authority was part of the official form. We began this vigil with a simple question, a question of identity. Who were the Anunnaki? But the records have not provided an answer. They have done something more profound. They have shown us that we are asking the wrong question. The tablets are like mirrors. They do not reveal the object of our search, but only reflect the shape of our own assumptions. The scribe's silence was not a void to be filled, but a boundary to be recognized. The true question is not who they were, but what kind of reality makes their explanation unnecessary. The silence, then, is not a missing piece of a story. It is the frame that surrounds the entire picture. It is the clean, white margin on a page of a legal code, a space that defines the edge of the text's jurisdiction. We have spent our time analyzing the script, but the real message may be in the structure of the page itself. The Sumerian world was a territory of immense, documented detail, but it was bordered by an axiom so vast and so foundational that it could not be written, only cited. It was not part of the map. It was the paper the map was drawn upon. The stars wheel overhead, their cycles measured in millions of years. The earth turns. The wind continues its slow work of erosion. There is a permanence in these cycles that feels akin to the system described in the clay. A great, impersonal machinery, running on a timescale that dwarfs human history. The decrees of the Anunnaki, the turning of the heavens, the meticulous accounting for a measure of grain, perhaps these were all just outputs from a single, unified logic, a cosmic bureaucracy whose workings are as remote and as predictable as the stars themselves. For a long moment, there is only this: the ruin under the night sky, the tablet under the lamplight, two fixed points, connected by a thin, steady line of quiet attention. No more questions, no more connections, just the weight of the objects themselves, and the 4,000 years of silence that holds them apart and binds them together. The enduring strangeness is not in the impossible rain lengths or the divine decrees. It is in the tone. It is in the profound lack of awe. Humanity's first encounter with the architects of its own civilization is recorded with the dry, procedural coolness of a shipping manifest. This inversion is the final, unsettling truth of the archive. The real anomaly is not the mythic content, but its complete absence. The records are haunted not by gods, but by the ghost of a vast and quiet administration. We are strangers here, reading a mail that was not intended for us. Our modern minds are built to seek narrative, to find the human story, the myth, the metaphor. We arrive in this ancient, silent office and try to interpret its legal codes as poetry. But the texts resist. They refuse to become the story we want them to be. They remain what they have always been: entries in a ledger, procedural records from a system whose purpose did not include us. This inquiry, this night's watch, must end. The connections have been made, the patterns observed, but the object that began it all remains unchanged. The tablet from Nippur will return to its climate-controlled drawer, its catalog number its only modern name. It will wait. It will outlast this moment, this voice, this entire line of questioning. It is patient. It has held its silence for 4 millennia. It can wait for 4 more. The eye is drawn, one last time, to the cuneiform itself. The small, sharp wedges. Forget the meaning, see only the form. A pattern of immense complexity and perfect order. A code. A script whose logic is as beautiful and as inaccessible as the structure of a crystal. These are not words. They are the fossilized traces of a thought process that is not our own, left behind in the hardened mud of a riverbank. What remains is not an answer, but a feeling. It is the feeling of having stood on the shore of a vast and dark ocean of time, of having seen the faint, regular pulse of a light on the far horizon. It is a light that does not signal to us. It is not a beacon of welcome or of warning. It is simply the operational light of a machine, a system that is still running somewhere out there in the deep. The vigil is over. The light in the archive goes out, leaving the tablet to the cool and the dark. Outside, the first light of dawn touches the highest point of the ruin at Nippur, casting long shadows across the dust of forgotten streets. The questions fade. The voice withdraws. The silence continues, unbroken.